week that was not without sadness. The Supreme Court ruling on the Voting Rights Act shows us that there's still a lot of work to do, but the Supreme Court rulings on Wednesday, and many of my staff went over to be in the crowd outside the court as the word, was going viral through the audience, and they say that they will never forget that experience. And then the vote on immigration reform on Thursday. It was a remarkable week. And I sort of shared with my staff, just kind of free-form, Tim Kaine's American history lesson in 5 minutes, and I'm going to share it with you. And it's apropos, this is a 4th of July speech, because we're going to celebrate the 4th next week. So, we can't have a speech in Virginia without saying something about Thomas Jefferson, right? And when Jefferson was tasked with the task of writing the Declaration of Independence, and he put into the Declaration those words, that all men are created equal. Are there words in the English language that are more known than those? Maybe in the beginning was the word, or to be or not to be, but if you think about English phrases that people know, all men are created equal, has got to be in your top 5. Jefferson, by writing that word that we celebrate as the first day of this country, in the Declaration of Independence, he basically said that this is the North Star in our political and moral and legal firmament in this country. All men are created equal. Equality. That was the beginning. It was how we began, by pledging fealty to it as a perfect principle. But we're not perfect people, and our institutions aren't perfect. And so, in Jefferson's life, you know the story. He was smart enough to articulate it as a principle, but he couldn't live that way. He owned slaves, and while he had great internal angst about it, even at his death, he didn't free his slaves. And Jefferson was the most enlightened of his day, so the rest of the society was equally ambivalent, if not more so, about the principle that we proclaim to be our self-defining principle. When the Constitution was written just 11 years after the Declaration of Independence, there was nothing in the Constitution about equality. In fact, in the Constitution, inequality was enshrined in 3 ways: that African Americans were 3/5 of a person, that even in a state that outlawed slavery, the state had to treat fugitive slaves as property and send them back to the states where they had escaped from. And Congress was barred from doing anything to block slavery for at least 25 years after the first Constitution was drafted. And so we had just said in our Declaration of Independence, equality was the North Star, and that within 11 years we put a Constitution together that enshrined inequality. And the story rolled forward during the 1800s all the way up through the Civil War. The primary fact of American political life was the argument or debate over slavery, over inequality. The Dred Scott case, the Kansas-Nebraska Act, the Missouri Compromise, the gag rule, all the anti-slavery petitions that John Quincy Adams filed when he was a congressman after he was president. The history of that first chunk of American life was all about what does equality mean, because it wasn't just a battle about the institution of slavery. It was a realization, kind of a conscience-sickening realization, that we weren't living how we had proclaimed we were going to live. And so then there was a war, and 750,000 people were killed, and at the end of the war, for the first time, nearly 100 years, 90 years after the Declaration of Independence, we finally put equality in the Constitution. 14th Amendment, every person is guaranteed equal protection under law. It's interesting, every person. In that 14th Amendment, there were other references to what citizens were guaranteed, but equal protection was guaranteed to every person, citizen or none. It was meant to encompass immigrants and visitors, and not just those who were citizens of the country. So you'd think we finally got it right with equality, but no, that was not the case either, because as soon as we put equality into the Constitution, just like we said it in the Declaration of Independence, immediately we couldn't live that way. Ku Klux Klan and lynching and Jim Crow, and in the institutional arena, Congress, the same Congress that said equality was in the Constitution, mandating segregated schools in the District of Columbia, which the federal government was over education in the district. The Supreme Court saying, no, I know this equal protection thing's in the Constitution, but it's fine for whites and blacks to be segregated on streetcars. It's fine for whites and blacks to be segregated all over the place. That continued for decades. How about women? Equal protection under law. Women sued under that clause right away to get the right to vote. The Supreme Court said, no, that's not what this means. They sued to get admission to be practicing lawyers in the state of Illinois where they were barred. The Supreme Court said, no, that's not what equal protection means. I mean, the wording was so simple, just like it was simple in the Declaration of Independence. It was simple, but our imperfect people, our imperfect consciousness, our imperfect courts, our imperfect Congress, we had the North Star there, but we couldn't really steer by it. It took 90 years from the insertion of equality into the Constitution for the Supreme Court to say, you know what, equality means what it says with respect to African Americans and education and public accommodations. I mean, the language is so simple, but it took 90 years for a Supreme Court, and they're called Supreme because they're supposed to be smart. But it took them 90 years to say equality means what it says with respect to African Americans. It took 110 years for the Supreme Court to say in a case, Reed versus Reed, that came out of Idaho in the early 1970s, I guess equality means what it says when it comes to women. There was a statute that basically said if somebody died without a will and an executor had to be appointed, the executor had to be a man. And that got challenged in the Supreme Court after years of ruling that the Equal Protection Clause didn't apply to women at all. They finally said, gosh, the language is just so simple. Equality means equality. So it was 90 years for African Americans. It was 110 years for women. And what Wednesday was about, it's now 145 years later, and the Supreme Court is saying that same thing. Equality means what it says when it comes to people, regardless of sexual orientation. So that's what, you look at our lives as people, you look at the lives of our institutions, we set ourselves up from the first day of our nation's beginning with a North Star to steer by, and sometimes we have and sometimes we haven't. But what this week, Wednesday, and then Thursday, the vote on immigration reform, was a reorientation toward the North Star. And we're not perfect, I'm not sure we'll ever get there, but we're reorienting toward it, and we're reminding ourselves, what it was about from the very beginning. So next week on the 4th of July, it's very common on the 4th of July, both in public commemorations, but also in home celebrations. I know my folks do this when they celebrate the 4th of July at home. You bring out the Declaration of Independence, and you read it, and when we get to those words next week, and we hear them, all men are created equal, we're going to think about it in a different way because of what happened this week. We're going to think about that North Star, and we're going to think about how we're orienting to it in a new and deeper and richer and an exciting way. And it will remind us that first sentence, that we remember on the first day of our nation's existence isn't just something in the past, not just something in a document, but it's something that's in the current and in the future, and it's a continued challenge to live more that way. Now,